So who in their studio currently has HD cameras? Good majority of you. And just kind of curious, how are you recording your HD signals from your studio? Where do you record those at, or how do you store those? Hard drive. Okay. So of the people who have studios, who's using 720p, who's using 1080i or 1080p? Raise your hand if you're 720. Couple 720, and then everybody else 1080i? Who's 1080p? Nobody's recording 1080p. Question, why not?
The reason why we don't do 1080p or 720 is because it's still standard def. And so, like, for example, some of our playback servers, they're incompatible between 480i and 1080i, so that's why we call it 1080i, just to ease up workflow.
Okay. So, yeah, it's good to see the lay of the land, nationally, what's going on. So I think currently we're the first HD channel of Comcast in Colorado, if I'm pretty correct about that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what we were thinking. We obviously, like a lot of you, have thousands of hours of SD assets that we would love to parlay quickly into an HD channel. So one of the things that we came up, will you go to that first slide for me, please? One of the things that we were thinking with Comcast, first of all, we're using tightrope system for our master control, and rather quickly we were thinking, what's a quick way we could get an HD channel on the air and still utilize our SD assets and still have something that would be available for the public right out of the gate. Not months and months of negotiations. Comcast, during our negotiations, said that they had 60 days to turn it around. And I'm hearing some horror stories that it can take a lot longer than that. So this is our HD channel. Doesn't look like a lot, but the interesting thing about it is what we've done is taken an SD asset, embedded it inside of our HD channel. This is a 1080i channel. And we have it kind of regions. We'll talk about those regions. So it doesn't look like a lot, but it's within 60 days we were able to acquire the equipment, have Comcast bring in their fiber connection, make sure that fiber connection was solid, send them a 1080 with HD SDI embedded, and have that signal. So it gave us a quick and relatively inexpensive way to leverage our assets, to get an HD signal up there, and to be something very usable for our community. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is an example. We have an RSS feed that feeds in for, a lot of you guys will have that on your bulletin boards. But the nice thing about it is we have multiple RSS feeds then in on our HD channel. This is a way for us to quickly, and if you remember during my introduction, and here's another, go to the next slide. So down here is just the weather. So things that we have on our standard def channels, but in addition, we have our standard def assets, which are playing out of a standard def server to fill in another one of those regions up there. So it was fairly easy. This outputs, we're actually using technology, a black magic converter to take an HDMI output of our carousel system, and we have embedded the SD signal coming out of the server, so it's totally programmable for our master control. We have HD channel. That's kind of one way I approached it. Our second HD channel, we're planning to be full screen HD, and so we'll still be able to utilize our SD assets in HD world when we make the full transition in production. We are just now upgrading our studio to HD. So, but we wanted to get an HD channel out of the gate rather rapidly. And so I know who out here uses tightrope systems for their master control? Wow. That's pretty impressive. So that's the power of tightrope, and I'm not a walking advertisement for tightrope. I mean, like all companies, we have issues with them, but we have more positive experiences than negative, and I would say that their technology allowed us to embed our SD into our NHD signal easily, rapidly, and it sort of forced Comcast's hand because I think they were convinced that we wouldn't be able to deliver an HD channel as rapidly as we did, and that really was due to tightrope. And so I have third things to talk about in cameras and studio stuff, but I will pass it to the next person. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Well, King County TV is
right at the beginning of this transition. Tell you a little bit about King County. King County is the 13th most populous county in the United States, and there's like 39 cities there, and about 450,000 people are on the cable that King County TV can service. And we estimate, along with the cable company, that there's about 18,000 people watching at any given time. So we're in this process where, in fact, I'm curious, how many of you are transitioning right now to HD? So, like us, it's been kind of a journey. I started working on this about 4 years ago. It was just kind of an idea, and I was wondering, where am I going to get the money? And anybody have money problems? I wish I had the, more money, more problems, but I don't have that particular problem. But I made a proposal to, by the way, King County TV is under the King County Council. So we serve the King County Council as well as the executive side of King County government. And I made a proposal to my then supervisor about what we would need in order to go HD. And that was at the time to not even knowing if we're going to have a channel anytime soon. And that's another story I'll get to in a moment. But I made a proposal, and I kind of guessed based upon the equipment that we had, just pretty much upgrading that to HD. And I came up with a number of about $800,000. And now it seems like I'm about $600,000 short. But in this process, we put out an RFP, and people bid upon it, and we chose a contractor. And we're kind of on our way to get started, but it took a really long time. And I guess I should back up a step. As far as the funding goes, it was kind of by chance that at the end of 2012, there was some money left over in one of the budgets. And someone said, well, why don't we give it to King County TV? They can use it. So we were kind of off and running at that point. And fortunately, I had put together a pretty decent proposal for that. But now the reality hit that, boy, we're actually going to do this. So we actually got started. And right now, today, as I speak this morning, they're pulling cable throughout the station right now. So we got started, it was probably almost 4 weeks ago. And so I was going to bring some pictures, but it's just old stuff being pulled out. So that wouldn't be very exciting. One of the things that's been difficult for us, and maybe some questions will come up later, is, I'll give you some more details on this, but it took a long time to get to a contract with the vendor, and the first vendor that won the RFP, and then we couldn't get to agreement. And it took about 4 months to get to that point. And in King County, our King County Council takes recesses twice a year, and that's in August and in December. And we're doing a full renovation. We're going to renovate our studio, of course, our playback system, just everything is going to be HD. And we were up against a very tight window when we started negotiating the original contract in May. I'm sorry, it was in April. And we thought, okay, we'll hit the July window so we can do the chamber. And that didn't happen. So now, after going to number 2, and it only took a month to negotiate that contract, and number 2 is now working, but they're working frantically because we have a window coming up in December to where we can go in and replace our cameras and all the things associated with that in our council chamber to finish the upgrade. So what we're doing is we have 2 control rooms. One is our production control room. The other is our master control, which is also the control room that we do meetings out of, those exciting meetings that most of us do. And the plan is to renovate production control first and get that up and going, and then we'll be able to do meetings out of there. And then after that, in December, when the council goes on recess, they're going to renovate the master control, and also, actually they'll start on that before recess. They're actually going to start on that. I'm getting my timeline mixed up. November 3rd is when we'll switch over to that control room, and then they can gut master control. And then in December, they'll finish up installing cameras, et cetera, in the council chamber during that break. And then coming out of, I guess at the beginning of the year, we'll be up and running in our master control, and we should be finished. And sign-off date right now is around January 15th. So they're going really fast right now, and it's kind of interesting, too, to see all these boxes coming in, and having to deal with things like trash that needs to be taken out of this. We have a pretty small studio, large by some standards, but pretty small. And that's the staging area for everything. And things come in, and huge boxes. It's really kind of amazing to me. I'm glad I don't have to do that part of it. I just kind of walk around, and the contractor says, we need to get somebody up here to take these boxes out. Okay, I can take care of that for you. So that's what I do. But anyway, that's just kind of a quick overview. And if you have some more specific questions, because there's lots of areas, some things that I really didn't anticipate going into it. Now, I'll mention one thing that, and maybe some of you have run into this. When I kind of did my rough outline of how much money it was going to take, I didn't think about, in King County, we have a facilities department. We also have our IT people. Well, IT people are sponsoring the project with me, and we have to pay them. So that's $85,000 out of my budget that goes to that. So that's something I just had not anticipated. But anyway, we'll talk some more. Thank you.
Now, Chris Perry is going to discuss the engineering aspects to consider in your transition.
I know, we made a PowerPoint. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here today. I'm not a huge PowerPoint fan, so I have some notes on the slides and just wanted to take you through a couple of things. Fair warning, I am a vendor. That's the disclosure piece. I will not be making a sales pitch, but I'm more than happy to talk back at the booth. So I've been through a number of different HD transitions. The first HD transition I was part of, I was a technician at WBZ in Boston, the CBS affiliate up there. And it's quite the project. We took 4 disparate routing systems and merged them into one giant routing system. HD Studios, HD Playout, HD Newsroom, HD Acquisition, HD Truck. So I've seen all spectrums of it. That was about a $30 million project. But I've worked on transitions as small as $40,000, $50,000 and less. So just a couple of things here. We talked briefly about who's shooting in their studios in HD. How many people have an HD channel that you're broadcasting on? Okay, significantly more hands than I anticipated. How many think you're never going to get an HD channel? Well, I'm here to tell you it will happen, and it's actually happening a lot quicker than I think any of us anticipated originally. In Massachusetts, there's 17 RCN overbuilds, and RCN came through to all of their access centers and are giving them one high-def channel. Currently, Telview powers all 5 of them that are currently broadcasting in HD on RCN. There's some precedent on the West Coast, in particular, newer systems that are in California and Oregon, Metro East Community Media, Portland Community Media, for example, both broadcasting in high definition. So, I mean, it is starting to come through, and fingers crossed, the floodgates will open up soon. Why HD? Why now? Can anybody even remember the last time you could buy a standard def camera? I can't. So, for starters, you can't edit. You can't capture in standard def without actually, the HD cameras clicking them down. All the editing software can handle HD. All the switchers at this point are virtually all HD. I want to go through some HD distribution, talk briefly about acquisition, some HD studio stuff, the migration plans aspect, as James is currently going through, where you sort of want to melt your face off halfway through it. Been there. So HD is everywhere, and because standard def equipment is becoming more scarce, we really have to make this transition to high def. It's almost a necessity at this point. We're dealing more and more with multi-screen, where we've got a diversified audience that's no longer just consuming their media on television screens. They're now consuming it on computers, laptops, mobile devices, Facebook, Twitter, Imgur, Reddit, you name the social media platform. So dealing with the multi-screen piece, and another part of that is that HD expectation. I, for one, will not watch a program in standard definition on television anymore. My fiance will constantly turn on the standard def channel because that's the number that she remembers, and I will promptly tune it to the high def channel just so that I'm paying for the cable service. We may as well. You're also, a lot of people are coming around in the buying cycle, where you're coming off your first digital video server that was standard definition. It's lasted you, 7 to 10 years. There's some gremlins in it from time to time, but you're starting to look at that, okay, when do we upgrade this? Studios, every 10 years, field cameras every 3, computers every 4, and playback servers every 5 to 7. Depending on how they're faring. So you're dealing with that piece as well. And plus, why not? I mean, it looks fabulous. Sports is, the whole world of sports has changed as a result of the complete migration to high definition. So talking about some of the HD distribution pieces, you've got obviously local broadcast servers and signage integration, which are 2 important pieces. I know that there's a heavy reliance on signage within the government sector in particular. Within the public and ed sector, over the last 6 to 9 months, I've seen actually a very heavy push to eliminate signage from the channels and rely significantly more on imported content that might come in from sources like the National Science Foundation or neighboring stations that might be producing high-definition content. You also have this great web platform with, for both live and video on demand, where now you can distribute to a worldwide audience your high-definition content. And this over-the-top piece, OTT, is becoming increasingly important. Roku is the #1 set-top over-the-top box, so it looks like an Apple TV for those of you who aren't familiar with Roku. And this is really where you're starting to get a lot of content providers that are distributing right to their audience. The House of Cards comes to mind, Orange is the New Black, where you actually have the distribution piece and the content creation piece very interlocked. And this is a very interesting model as we talk about the future of where high definition is going to live. And the over-the-top piece, where you've got sort of the cord cutters, is really, I think, where you're going to see a very heavy push for at least this sector to become more relevant. Obviously, we've got cable systems and set-top boxes. A lot of cable systems have converted from an analog cable base to a digital cable base, and in doing so, they've freed up a lot of bandwidth, because in the 6 megahertz of space that it takes to have an analog channel, you can fit 38.8 megabits per second of digital traffic. So that's approximately 3 HD channels, 4 at about 9.5 meg 1080i, which is still acceptable. You also start to get into 12 to 14 standard definition channels that you can fit in that same space, and the cable providers are really seeking to reclaim that bandwidth. That's another important piece here. How many people are still on an analog cable system? So, there's maybe, 10% of us out there, and there's this big push to get rid of this, legacy analog, because you can do so much more with that digital spectrum once you've reclaimed it. And I'm a firm believer that the starting point for all HD upgrades is really this HD distribution piece. In part because we sell servers, but also in part because it's really important to have a place to put all the HD media that you're producing. I would even place HD distribution, a platform for it, above doing an HD studio. Merely for the fact that as soon as you're shooting in HD in the studio, if you still have a standard def playback server that's going to get upgraded in a year or two, you've got nowhere to put that media. So you're saving these massive files somewhere, and that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense long term. HD acquisition, so you've got satellite reception, possibly, Classic Arts Showcase. Who loves Classic Arts? I love Classic Arts. And bicycle content coming in. As I mentioned earlier, you can't buy a standard def field camera anymore. It just isn't possible. You've also got the field lighting kits. One of the things here is that, as we talk about high definition, lighting becomes increasingly important. You can't quite say, it's pretty close, it's good enough. You really actually have to spend some time. Storing and editing in HD and shared storage starts to become a bigger piece of the puzzle. Almost 60% of my day-to-day job is dealing with network infrastructure. I am as much a network engineer now as I am a TV broadcast engineer, because in reality, the two fields are merging a lot faster than I think anyone anticipated. We heard, how many people are sneakernetting LaCie hard drives around? Couple? How many of you guys have storage area networks, SANs, NAS arrays? Okay, so a fair amount of you are already doing this. Anybody still using tape? No? Couple? Okay. Soft spot in my heart for tape. Threaded a few 1-inch machines in my life. So the shared storage piece becomes important because now you can move media around without having to get up and transport that media manually. You can't trip and fall and destroy your hard drive because it's on a managed array in the facility. Managed arrays, by the way, are not infallible. There's a few horror stories out there about people losing 96 terabytes of content, myself notwithstanding. I strongly suggest a disaster recovery plan as you look at large storage arrays. When we talk about HD studios, there's a lot of phased approaches that I look at. I always talk about core components first and peripherals later. The big pieces being things like your video switcher and your graphics components and your audio components. Basically anything that's going to have more than 3 connectors attached to it is going to be considered a core component of the system. And then adding the peripherals later. So a lot of times, I mean, studio camera setups with pedestals and prompters will run you $45,000 to $50,000 easy. For an HD studio camera setup. Now, maybe you can reuse the pedestals for an extra couple of years and save that budget and put it towards studio cameras. I do suggest replacing all studio cameras at once because you'll never get the color match right between a legacy camera and an HD camera. But, if you've got money for a great switcher and you wanted a really nice switcher platform, put that in, and then next year add the cameras. And then the following year add the pedestals. And you can really build onto a system by reusing certain legacy components and low-cost converters, like some of the Blackmagic converters out there, Aja, to be able to not have to spend $200,000 right off the bat and do it all at once, because that's not always budget feasible. You've also got some environmental considerations when you're looking at HD studios. Obviously, I mentioned lighting earlier. It becomes even more important in a studio environment. Set design, because when you go from shooting from 4:3 to 16:9, you pick up an extra 30% of pixels in this instance. So that's another consideration that you have to look at, is you may actually have to upgrade your sets in the process as well. Flooring is another one of those things that sort of gets forgotten. Flooring, HVAC, and electrical are my 3 favorite subjects. There's now removable floor tiles that you can actually replace. Some studios have epoxy floors that are beautiful, shiny black. And then you've also got some set companies that are doing like green screen floor tiles, where you could literally make a virtual set out of the floor and the walls just by virtue of the fact that you've got these 3x3 foot tiles that you can flop down on the floor and pull them up later on. And do it right, do it once. I'm a big fan of this motto. You don't want to have to replace a video switcher 2 years down the road, because it's really hard to justify to a board, a city council, the executive director, whomever, that maybe didn't make the best decision there. Kind of got to go back and redo that. So taking your time on making some of these decisions is important. Migration plans, map it out, meeting with all interested parties and stakeholders, and working with vendors and integrators closely. This is one of those things that should live on a giant whiteboard, be it a digital whiteboarding system like Trello, or an actual physical whiteboard in the facility, so that you know exactly how the migration plan is going to go, so that you're going to minimize downtime, service interruption, and others. Have new gear running in place or nearline before demolishing the old system. Running in parallel is very, very hard. Anybody who's done a server-to-server transition and says, we want to run both servers same time, same content with all the programming, you don't always realize that that's literally twice the amount of programming between the 2 servers. And so if you spend 40 hours a week programming one server, you're going to spend 40 hours a week programming the other server to do it identically. So looking at those sorts of, trying to minimize the amount of time that you're actually running things in tandem is important. Obviously, if you're trying to reuse the same rack space, reuse the same physical space, the same studio space, this becomes very difficult. Doing things like making sure all of the equipment is ordered before you start ripping the old stuff out, or the equipment is available. When the tsunami hit Japan, all of the not just the shipping lanes, but also the actual product lines got messed up. There was a tsunami that hit I think it was Malaysia, that wiped out half of the Seagate hard drive manufacturing, and we couldn't get hard drives for the better part of 6 months without paying a small fortune. So I mean, there's environmental factors that can start to get into this. Dealing with maintenance windows. Some, not all of you, might have to worry about doing this late at night or early in the morning. I, for one, have done a lot of 3 a.m. transitions to try and make sure that we minimize the public viewing impact as we look at migrating. Having a plan B, it's never something people want to talk about, but having that plan B, especially when you're mapping this out, is really crucial because Murphy was an optimist. If anything can go wrong, it will, and generally at the worst possible moment. Having that extra converter available, the extra 50 feet of cable, BNC barrels, your best friend. Just because you never know, you might fire it all up and all of a sudden, oh my God, it doesn't work. And buying yourself that time to be able to get around it for a short duration. Wanted to talk briefly about 4K. I think I only have 2 more slides here. Why not 4K? I am not a 4K advocate. Mammoth file sizes. You're talking legitimately 4 to 5 times the size to store those files. We're also dealing with the screen size issue, and I've got a graphic on the next slide that I'll show you, where you don't always get the benefit that I think people are looking for. There's currently no real distribution model. This might be alleviated a bit as we start looking at the HEVC, MPEG-H, H.265, VP9 codec change. That would be the next evolution of what we know as H.264. But the bigger issue is, it takes up so much bandwidth that it's not always feasible to distribute it. The cable companies and satellite providers, satellite has a little bit more leeway than the cable companies, but they're still trying to cram as much stuff as they can down that pipe. And so you don't always get the return on investment with that either. I think it's going to ultimately be a very niche model. I think that you're going to see some programs, in particular science, learning, astronomy, that sort of thing, where you really would get a huge benefit from dealing with 4K. I think that's really where you're going to see it. Medical situations, in operating theaters for distance learning, I think is really where you'll see 4K the most. 6G and 12G SDI are not standards. I'm sorry, Blackmagic Design. There is no SMPTE standard for 6 or 12G SDI. They've done a fantastic job marketing it. For those of you who aren't familiar, Blackmagic basically at NAB this year came out and said, look, we've got 6G SDI capable of 4K and 12G SDI instead of what we normally deal with, which is 3G SDI. And currently 4K, as its SMPTE-approved implementation, works over 4 3G SDI cables, and it has the top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right quadrants, and they then get stitched back together on the other side as an image. So that's currently how they're dealing with it, and due in large part to the fact that as we start dealing with longer cable lengths, you can't actually push that much data without the jitter spec going out of control. You can only really go about, I think on 6G, I think it's 6 feet without the jitter getting unwieldy. And on 12G SDI, I think it's 18 inches. So, maybe as fiber standards they'll come out, but in terms of a copper standard, there's nothing really been ratified yet. Mentioned briefly the HEVC, the high efficiency video coding, H.265. There's been a lot of development on this. Elemental Technologies out of Portland, Oregon is, in my opinion, the market leader right now. For an idea of where we are right now with H.265, I was offered this comparison by Elemental. It takes them a whole day, 24 hours, to take a feature-length Hollywood movie, 90 minutes, and compress it into an H.265 video. A whole day, 24 hours to compress 90 minutes of video. Their nearest competitor is 8 days. Think about that for a second. 8 days to take 90 minutes and make it an H.265. So they're really, I mean, they're on the cutting edge there, but they're really, and it costs $100,000 to do that. So they're really on the cutting edge, but I don't think the standard is quite there yet. It's been fun to watch. And 2.6K is good enough. For example, The Dark Knight was shot 2.6K Alexa RE. The file sizes were manageable for the studios. They weren't dealing with 4 times the storage, 4 times the capacity. And that was shot in IMAX, and it looks fantastic. You'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference. Why does this graphic never load? I hate you, PowerPoint. So this is a really cool chart that shows you the viewing distance versus the screen size and diagonal, and I'm going to pop up a little red box here. This is pretty much where you're sitting in the living room, and your average screen size is between 30 and 70 inches, and you're between, let's call it 7 and 15 feet away. And basically all of these lines show you where the benefits become noticeable. So at that distance, 1080p is definitely at the upper, in the upper end there on, in red here. This is going to be, where your 1080p benefit, as well as this red line, the full benefit of 1080p becoming available. You start to see the benefit of 4K once you get really close, 7 feet, and screen sizes up in the 70-inch range. Does anyone sit 7 feet off their television? I might go blind. So you wouldn't see that until you either get really large screen sizes. I don't know about you guys. I don't have the budget or the wall size to put a 100-inch TV in my living room. Or you start sitting really close. So I once again, niche model, I think that you might start to see more of this for the science end of things. And my bold prediction of what the next revolution in HD is really going to be is holographic projection, if I may indulge. So that's what I've got, and now we turn it back over.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
All righty. Well, the balance of this session is really about getting your questions answered, and we've generated a number of questions which we'll start with, but feel free. We had to rob that microphone for the table up here, so we'll just kind of yell it out and then recite it back so everyone can hear it, and then fire it to the folks up here. But the first question that we had generated is, what are the biggest hurdles each of you had to overcome in your transition to HD? And we'll start with Randy. There's microphones right there.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Probably the biggest hurdle really was our negotiation with Comcast. I mean, tried to convince them that we needed 2 HD channels. The question to them was, why do you need 2 HD? We had three standard def channels, and one of those, by the way, is the Arch channel. But negotiations was a big hurdle for us. But then really kind of going back to the point made earlier, looking at our infrastructure. And I do agree, you need to look at your infrastructure. When we built our system back in 2002, we specifically made sure we got wiring that could handle HD. We knew we were going to be standard def, but we made sure our wiring, and this is a technical term, and some of you will appreciate this and some will not, but we made sure that our wiring were 1505A Belden cables put in back then. We knew that our router couldn't handle the HD signal. We didn't have HD signals, but even at that point, we wanted to make sure we could handle 3G so we could get full 1080p if we ever wanted to. And so our wiring was 1505A Belden, and that's an important part because that's a lot of copper in the ground, and even our connectors could pass a 3G signal. So, that's probably our biggest hurdle was franchising, and then now we are looking at the actual infrastructure that we want to put in there. The prices of routers have come so far down, though. It's really not a huge hurdle. We're looking at Ross for routers, sort of the mid-range routing systems, and Ross has real reasonable prices for your control panels if some of you have that kind of infrastructure. So that's sort of our biggest hurdles.
Great, thanks, Randy.
I guess as I mentioned earlier, our biggest hurdle was actually getting money to do it. And since that has been partially solved, as I mentioned earlier, how we went from the contractor that won the bid to the next contractor, the next contractor was $200,000 more. So that we had to actually cut some things out. Like one of the things that we wanted to do was replace the lighting in our studio and also in the council chamber. And we're not going to be able to do that. It's just, when I originally was thinking about this whole project, I said it would be nice to be able to replace the lighting. And I thought we were going to be able to. So it was quite disappointing to not reach the contract agreement in the price range that we could do everything, because it is a complete upgrade for us. Routing switchers, cameras, DAs, everything is being replaced. But, and I guess another challenge too is, which should be resolved, or has been resolved, is we don't have the channel yet. King County just recently reached an agreement with Comcast for the cable franchise, and with that came our HD channel. But we're going to have to wait, as I've been told, 6 months from the time that the agreement is signed until we get the channel. So we should be up and running before the channel is actually there for us.
How many of you are in renewal of a franchise? Okay. Well, Chris brought up a very good point in his presentation that the standard of measurement for an analog channel was 6 megahertz. And that was actually in our franchise agreement in Tacoma when we negotiated in 2007 through 2009. We basically used that measurement, against Comcast to say, look, you're going digital, and we're fine with that. We want to go to the next technology. But if we're going to give you, we had 8 channels and 6 megahertz times 8, 48. If we're going to give you 48 megahertz back, then the very least you can do is give us 1 HD channel and have the rest in digital analog, or SD. And they fought us. They don't want anybody to have HD if they don't have to give it up. But luckily in our city, we also have a municipal cable provider named Click, and we worked it out with them. We negotiated at the same time 2 franchises, which was, that's why my hair's all gray now, but anyway. But so utilize that information to your advantage when going into that negotiation, because if I had to do it over again, I would have asked for even more HD channels, because now our colleagues from Pierce County, which envelopes Tacoma, they're already HD, and we don't have that in our franchise. So going forward, we'll definitely be negotiating for more HD channels. Now, whether Comcast will be open to that, they obviously won't be, but we'll have to drag them kicking and screaming. So anyway, Randy?
I just wanted to kind of tag on to that, since the franchise is still fairly new, the negotiations fresh in my mind. One of the things that we looked at, we were fighting for our 2 HD channels, and that was fine, and we eventually got them, but we started looking at the balance of the franchise, and our franchise, I believe, I don't know how many here have a broadband, I call it a broadband hook in their franchise, where Comcast has to give you broadband access to the cloud. Anybody? I didn't think so. And so we're probably one of the first. I know that has become a model for the CCOA in Colorado. And it's pretty unique, where we said, really for government programming, let's be honest, most of the stuff we do, except for council meetings, are not live. And most of the stuff is really citizens want to come and find specific things. So we started negotiating with Comcast and said, rather than fight for more and more HD, let's get a broadband pipe to the world, which Comcast will pay for. They will install the equipment, they will maintain, and let's reach our citizens who, in Aurora, about 60% of our population gets Comcast. So let's reach the rest of our population, and let's not have to rely on YouTube with all the problems that can arise there. Let's get a very robust, and so that's one of the things we fought for, just related to that. Rather than looking at a linear model of the way the world wants to see programming, we really went back to the Hulu and the Netflix model and said, but Comcast is going to pay for it, and let them do that, and that was successful for us. I just want to kind of point that out.
Great. Now, Chris, let's start with you on this one. What engineering aspects are the most commonly overlooked in the process, do you believe?
Yeah, so I touched briefly on it in the presentation too, and Randy made a great point about, if you're running cable now, make sure that it's HD compliant. 1505 is a great standard. 1694 Belden is the next, is the RG6 version of that. King's connectors are great. Lighting considerations are obviously a big piece of this. Unfortunately, James had to cut that out, but it is something that you can bolt on later. HVAC and dealing with other environmental considerations also becomes a big deal. You don't want to end up in a situation where your brand new equipment is overheating. A lot of people, a lot of control rooms I've been in, the equipment rack for the control room is installed in the corner of the control room. And so now you've got a noisemaker and a heat generator in a room that you really want quiet and cool. Or quiet and comfortable at least. So if you have the space, when you're looking at migration paths, dealing with even physical building infrastructure where you can put in a server room or co-locate your equipment in a server room and then extend the user components back into the control room is a big deal. Furniture and other consoles is another thing that you really want to look at. There's nothing quite like dropping a $200,000 system into a 15 or 25-year-old, Formica countertop. I've seen it. I've unfortunately had to do it. I would, strongly suggest looking at, either custom furniture, which is fairly prolific at this point, or even going with some of the off-the-shelf Winstead TBC consoles or Mid-Atlantic. And finally, uninterruptible power supplies. I can't tell you how many places I walk in and I look and they've got, one really ancient APC on the floor. Yeah, our server's backed up. So strongly suggest looking at, upgrading power infrastructure, especially as we go more server-driven. This, the infrastructure itself requires a lot more power and, there's a BTU calculation too, so you can calculate exactly how much cooling you're going to need for a given space. And so before you embark on a project, looking at things like heat and power loads will save you from having to go back and add another 20 amp circuit when you could have done it once, or having to add a split ductless system to a server room later on to keep the equipment in a favorable environment.
Great. I just need to ask a question here because Jim Schiffman and Tim Clauser from Lakeville, I can't take credit for it. After I left that city, they put in place a soundproof rack. Can you share the name of that or the product? Oh, okay. Noren? Okay. And it's got like a glass front door, and it's the first time I came back to visit was 3 or 4 years after I left Tacoma, and I noticed right away the difference that soundproof rack made in that production environment. So great job there. So all right, what advice would you give others regarding the RFP development process? And let's start with James on this one because he's had the biggest challenge, I think, and I feel sorry for him.
Which part of it, Jeff?
No, the negotiating part was, that was brutal.
Well, let's see, where do I start? For us, it was pretty, I guess from the beginning, the fact that KCIT and the legislative branch partnered on this project. And it was really good for me because my partner, who, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to wind up paying her side of the county $85,000 for her services. But she wrote all that stuff up. I mean, we'd sit down and talk about it, and I'd tell her what my wants and needs were, because I'm a production person. But she was the one who wrote it up in the form that it needed to be so that it would pass procurement and some of the other people above them that had to approve this stuff. And that worked really well. And we've actually have been really good partners in this process. The other side, I guess, is just making sure you're thorough. You really have to state what you want. And one thing I was afraid of was, a lot of times, when you go out to bid on something and you wind up being, I won't say forced, but encouraged to take the lowest bid. But fortunately, we had a process, and maybe a lot of you have the same thing too. We scored each individual contractor, each RFP that came through. And in fact, I remember the lowest bidder on our project was $800,000, and the highest bidder was, I think it was $1.3 million. But the lowest bidder had lots of places in what was written up for owner-furnished equipment. So what they wanted to do was do a bunch of up-converting. And our goal was to replace everything. We wanted to start new. King County TV went on the cable in 1996, and most of our infrastructure was still from 1996, so we knew we wanted to replace all that stuff. But I guess I'll stress again that when it's written up, just make sure you write up what you really want. You have to be very clear. And I did run into a situation with ours where I wanted to make a change in something that was proposed. Actually, it was our playback system. And that was a very, very difficult road to go down. In fact, procurement told me that, you can't do that. You can't do that, James. And then the contracts guy says, you can't do that. But actually, I wound up doing it. But they had to agree. They had to buy into it. But that's just how it turned out.
Well, and if I can just add one thing, I guess basically you don't have to be afraid to walk away, right, from that first vendor.
No, you don't. And I'll say, too, that it was very, very disappointing when that happened. They put together a very good plan for us. And in that plan, they came up with some things that I hadn't thought of, which I'm not the all-knowing and telling anyway. But they proposed a couple of things. I said, that's a good idea. And, I thought we had it. And the price was right because, as Chris was just talking about, like rack rooms, we had planned to, because we had the money to close off our rack room. We're going to build a wall, put some glass doors in there to make sure that that part stayed cool, and plus it's noisy. Our rack room is right next to our master control room where we do our live council meetings. And we had made all these plans to go ahead and do that. I don't know how if you work for counties or your cities work. Anytime that the people that come through and give us bids, the people, again, our facilities department that set all that stuff up, we have to pay them. So all these people came through, gave us these bids, and it was really, we thought we were going to get this thing put together. It was going to look really nice, and it is going to look nice, but we're not going to have the wall. And another thing, Chris, that we are replacing everything. So we are getting new casework for everything. Everything is going to be custom, and it's going to be done right this time. And I don't want to say anything negative about the people that put it together before, but when I came into King County TV almost 13 years ago, the control rooms, the way that they were set up, were just so bizarre to me coming out of commercial TV. And ergonomically, they were terrible. And I made a few changes along the way, and now I'm off the subject, but we're correcting those things this time in this upgrade. So hopefully this will last for a few years.
Great. Anybody else?
Just have general questions. I don't know how much time we have.
Yeah, we still have about 20 minutes. Is it better to have one company design and install the system, or have one company design and another company do the install? I know a number of our contractors in our area have said we're not going to build someone else's system because there ends up being finger pointing at each other about whose fault it is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just, being an integrator myself and doing a lot of integration work over the last couple of years, I mean, I would say, yeah, having the same company do the installation that did the spec for you is definitely the preferred way to go. However, if you've got sometimes a broadcast consultant is a good role to have. Somebody who would argue with the vendor on your behalf, somebody who can handle, making changes as you go through the RFP process, where maybe they're not bidding on a project, they helped you put together exactly what you're looking for along the way, but you're paying them out of a separate line item. I've seen that work very, very well at different locations that are especially when you're sending things out to bid. Nonprofit organizations, the 501c3s that we deal with, generally can go whatever route they want to go, depending on obviously their local organization bylaws. But they can choose to send it out for bid or proposal or not. Single source, sole source vendor options is another one of those ways that you can sort of get people on the hook for exactly what you're looking for. Sony only makes this Sony camera, and you can only buy this Sony camera from this one vendor because they're the only ones authorized to sell it. So you can try and I won't say circumvent the process, but there are certain ways that you can help to guarantee exactly what you're looking for, and a consultant in that role might also help play a big role.
And I know the purchasing department will probably grind you a little bit about wanting to go away from the RFP process, because that's their safety net about keeping the auditors away and stuff. But I know we're looking at a method where the preferred vendor would be, they're already on our architectural and engineering roster, so we're going to do a design contract, and then we're doing a sole source on the other side. So Randy or James, anything in addition on that?
It kind of depends on who's in your area as well. In Colorado, there's several possibilities, and the problem that rises for some of our government agencies is that the people who might do the design build also want to bid on the products, and a lot of our codes might call for the fact that, well, we can do the design build, but you're forbid to bid on the project, and so they kind of walk away from that, and there's some issues related to that. So it is dicey, and I agree with the idea of a broadcast consultant, to have somebody come in who could be neutral if you're able to find that. It doesn't have a dog in the race, so to speak. So that's not a bad route to go, is get somebody who can really, but also, I'm just curious in studios, those who have studios and upgraded to HD with your cameras, just show of hands, who's Sony out there? Sony Studio. Okay. I guess Panasonic. Interesting. JVC. Grass Valley. And let's see, Hitachi. Ikegami. What have I missed? Anybody? I guess I got all the big ones, so I was curious. Just curious to see, because we're actually in the middle of that right now. So
James?
Just quickly, Jeff, we did consider it, but we decided that, and also with procurement's encouragement as well, that it would probably be better just to have this same company design it and build it, so there would be no finger pointing.
Right. Very good. All right, I'm down to our last three questions. Is it better, in your opinion, are there benefits to doing the upgrade all at once versus in stages? I would assume that it'd be better to do it all at once, but that's just me.
Yeah, I think James is doing it all at once.
it's a money thing for us. It's 3 years.
Okay.
So money thing for Randy. So it's a 3-year thing. In my opinion, I'm a big fan of, if you can do it all at once, certainly do. But if you have to break it up, like I said, do the core system, core components first, and add the peripherals to the system later on. That generally works out pretty well. The stuff that you can't replace or move, consoles. Who wants to replace a console after you've just installed everything in it? Nobody. So dealing with that stuff up front.
Are there ways to transition to HD without huge budgets for equipment?
That's a loaded question.
It is. It is. That's why I'm throwing it.
So and in particular, I think I was given a challenge once. Somebody said, I have $20,000 and I need to make a high school HD studio. How the heck do you do that? And I went through, and you start looking at going routes like buying prosumer cameras that have HDMI out that you could run into an SDI converter. You have to start looking at systems like the Blackmagic Design switchers, which are not great. You can fry eggs on the front of them, but they work. So you start looking at stuff like that. You start having to look at things like, the Midland walkie-talkies instead of an intercom system. So there are certainly ways that you can do it on the cheap. Once again, the core components there, you're probably going to have to replace in 3 to 5 years. I mean, the little Canon Vixia cameras with high school students might give you a couple of months.
All right, and the final question that we generated was, what are some good ways to leverage older SD assets after the HD transition?
Boat anchors.
I pointed out the slide, and I think we have thousands of hours. A lot of those hours of SD programming are informationals that we've spent a lot of money acquiring, and we're certainly not going to give up those SD assets. And I think embedding an SD video stream inside of an HD channel, if you have that option, is a good way to do that. Of course, and then the VOD aspects of it, where we're doing both live streaming and VOD using our free Comcast broadband pipe out is another way we're doing that. So,
Okay. Any plan, James, for your SD equipment?
I have a couple of really good DV cams I could sell you guys. Actually, it's really actually pretty funny going through this right now because we're pulling all this gear out, and I guess we've been shooting in the field in HD for a couple of years, and then also our mobile production unit is HD. And I remember when I bought those DV cams, and so they've been sitting in a closet, but now I just surplused them recently, thinking that maybe somebody can use them. That's what we do with the county. If they think they can sell it, they just send it to the surplus warehouse and they do that. But I had thought about, we have currently a ProBell router, which can be upgraded to HD. But in this process, I decided I just want all new everything. And so we pulled it. It's actually still in there. It's going to be pulled out. But I'm going to see if I can sell it. I think to upgrade it, it's maybe about $10,000 or something like that. But we'll see.
3 or 9? 9,000.
It's a good router. The other thing is we have, of course, a ton of SD programming. I mean, a lot of about 3 terabytes. But since we've been shooting in HD for a couple of years, we have saved a lot of those original files. We're going to go back and convert those to HD, so we'll have quite a bit of content to begin with. And then it's going to be a few years because, as us PEG channel people know, there's some evergreen pieces that'll last forever. And some of those maybe we'll just have to reshoot or whatever. But yeah, we definitely plan to keep using it because we don't really have much choice.
And in light of my boat anchors, building a dub station is really a great location for that SD gear. Saving one working device of every vintage and flavor along the way is an important piece, especially if you're dealing with a large SD legacy archive that may or may not be digital. How many people still archive on DVD? So a fair number of you are still going to need DVD players for the foreseeable future. DV, mini DV, DV cam, DVC Pro HD, Beta, 3/4 inch. SVHS, you've got a smattering of formats over the last 15 years. And so putting that together, even reusing a router in that example so that you can route basically to and from all of the decks, it's a good Saturday morning project for you.
All righty. Any questions from the audience? Got 3 very experienced individuals up here that have shared their wealth of knowledge. Okay, go ahead on the right side there.
This is more of a comment than it is a question.
Mm-hmm.
2 things. One, we're going through that transition right now. So the thing that we've done is we've selected our vendor, like to meet with them, go through your requirements line by line and have that conversation so that everybody is exactly clear on what your intention is versus what they're going to deliver. Because things change over time. From the time you thought about this to the time delivery occurs,
Yeah, it was interesting. Randy mentioned Ross, and that's a switcher that we're considering as well. And part of their package is the Expression graphics software, and they actually have professional graphics creators that will, as part of your installment, come in and build your promo pages and things like that with you. And so I thought that was a great extra service that they considered on the front end. So there was a question on the left side here. Keith?
Randy, did you maintain, were you able to maintain your SD channels when you went to HD? That's one of our concerns is when you get the HD channel, we want to be, going all of our residencies that have basic cable to be able to get our channel.
Yes, that was a requirement from our council. I mean, we certainly don't want to exclude the citizens who only have standard def. So we did. We actually had 4 channels, 4 SD channels, and we agreed with Comcast to give back one of those when our first HD channel went active, which we did. And but we have another channel that we'll be able to provide as well as part of our franchise. So as you saw, what we call the hybrid channel, where we're embedding our SD assets, coming out of an SD server. And I think that's a great way. That'll be those, those legacy programming will be around for years and years. But we were able to maintain our SD channels, absolutely.
And we did that in our franchise as well. When we negotiated, we wanted to make sure that we refer to the basic cable, but there isn't really basic cable anymore. But we keep the SD channel down low and then have the high def channel as well.
If I could just add one thing, just because it's on my mind, I do take I disagree with Chris on one point. I don't think 4K is a fad, and I don't think that we as governments are going to have to necessarily worry about it on Comcast for at least the next 10 years. But I don't think it's a fad like 3D was. I don't know about holographic television, but I was paying attention to IBC, and Hitachi came out with their 4K camera. I know Blackmagic did last year. And they sold every one of them they can bring off the assembly line for the next year is already sold. So, and I know some of the stadiums now are wired with fiber for 4K. I don't think that we necessarily, and for our city council meetings, God, who wants to see a city council member in 4K?
No,
I
please.
don't. But I do believe that we as governments, and I know we are looking, I mean, GoPro just announced their 4K 60p camera yesterday or a couple days ago. So we have to think about 4K in production. And one of the unique things that one of our vendors brought up, we might have a 1080p cameras in our studio, but we might have one 4K camera in our studio. And the cool thing about that is it allows you to, with that one camera, get 2 shots. And so there's some interesting, unique ways of using 4K cameras when you do fill regions of interest. So I do disagree, and I don't think 4K is a passing fad. It's here to stay, and it's just going to build. That's just my opinion. So.
Yes, sir.
Quick question: If you're already producing in HD 16:9, and you still have SD channels, do you tend to letterbox your transmissions, or do you center cut? Do you have a preference, and why?
Well, we prefer letterbox. That's what we're doing right now. It's sort of that look that we prefer. So, for example, we're acquiring in HD. We're editing in HD, and we're editing 1080p, and so that's our preferred format. So. But when we down convert for our news show, which our studio is still standard def, and we do letterboxing on all of our stuff to bring it down. So.
I'm a side cut fan. I think framing for 4:3 in the first place still makes some degree of sense. So, I mean, that's also I came right out of broadcast news. I mean, we shot the news every single night in HD 16:9, and we shot it so that we could side cut it on the way out if we had to. So, I mean.
We haven't decided yet. We're not quite there. We're thinking about it, though. Actually, we're having that conversation, but we haven't quite decided yet.
Yes, sir.
Did you guys do a negotiation when you were up for franchise renewal for getting an HD channel? If you're in the middle of a franchise agreement already, you want to get an HD channel?
We didn't.
I would just say good luck. So.
Yeah, you'll have to be prepared to know what you're going to give up, because they're going to ask you right out of the chute to give up half your peg channels or something like that. So, those I don't know if it's possible. But
The precedent in Boston with the RCN channels was that most of the organizations were actually in the middle of a franchise, and RCN decided to do it. So, I mean, it's probably not unheard of, but yes, especially when you're dealing with the 800-pound gorilla, you probably expect to give your shirt.
And my understanding, at least at this point, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but Charter has been even a worse stickler for not giving up HD than Comcast. So, yeah, Pat had a question, Pat Cook.
Just while we're transitioning, what are your thoughts on 16:9 SD?
It's a great question. So, especially with ENG, field cameras going 16:9 before virtually most of the trucks I was dealing with and pro broadcast, we actually did 16:9 anamorphic and then stretched it on its way out of the control room, or its way into the control room, I should say. Pan and scan, basically. I've seen a couple of stations that have actually taken all of their 16:9 media, and instead of letterboxing it, they actually broadcast it out as squished 16:9 anamorphic. And, their viewers at home know to hit the wide zoom button on their remote, and it looks okay. I'm personally not a fan of it. I think that, the minute that you take square pixels and make them non-square pixels and stuff them, I mean, you're losing something, obviously, in that transition. But there are a number of people that do it. It's not invalid.
We actually had Comcast change the aspect plane on the encoders.
Yeah, so that starts to get into active format description, or AFD, which is not necessarily passed on all cable systems either, especially on some of the PEG channels. So, it really depends what market you're in and what encoder they're using. Some of the legacy encoders don't have AFD flagging capabilities, and you're also dealing with a plethora of other things in the way, muxers, groomers, what people do at home on their set-top boxes. So there's a lot of moving parts there. The best thing that I can say is, no matter what you do, somebody at home is still going to do it wrong.
All right, Rick, you had a question? No? Okay. All right, one more?
Maybe others. Do you know what transport they have to Comcast? Like, are you handing them off HDSDI, or are they placing?
Yeah, they're requiring, because we have a fiber connection, so we'll give them HDSDI with embedded audio. That's their preferred format, at least in Colorado. I'm not sure nationwide, but
All right.
And I can speak one step further to that. HDSDI as a handoff mechanism is great. What they're actually doing is they're taking it and they're running it into an encoder. I actually deal a lot. Telview as a company deals a lot with Comcast. I've spent a number of days down in Colorado, Centennial, at the Comcast Media Center, doing some testing. And so what they do is they convert all of that to IP. And then they groom that IP out onto QAM channels that make it to your set-top boxes at home. So it's a pretty fascinating technology. I could talk for 4 days about how that actually works.
We don't have 4 days.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to learn more about IP, just stop by the booth, and I'm more than happy to talk about it.
All right. Well, I want to take this opportunity. For refreshment break is at the upstairs now, so please thank James Burns, Randy Simpson, and Chris Perry for their time. And also, to let you know that if you don't want to buy a hoodie or a shirt because it's cold out, for you Michigan fans, I do have Golden Gopher sweatshirts and hoodies for rent. And for you Super Bowl, Colorado people, I do have some Seattle Super Bowl champion paraphernalia to rent. So anyway, thank you very much. Enjoy your conference.